The cyclone moved a lot of material around in our rivers, both gravel and silt. There's a perception that in some places that's built up to really high levels and perhaps left big holes in our rivers in other places. So to determine whether that's actually true or not, we have commenced a resurvey of all of our rivers so that we can determine what that level of gravel is in relation to our set grade lines. What's also underway as a result of the cyclone are scheme reviews on all of our rivers. That will look at what our gravel management practices are and look to determine whether there's something that we could do differently or better. It's a natural process and it starts up in the mountains around the Hawke's Bay area. That's the Kawikas and the Ruahinis. So you get a lot of rocks that fall off the hillside, off the cliffs, particularly around rivers. All that material ends up in the river and eventually washes down to the coast. That occurs when we have high river levels, and those high flows wash that material downriver. As those rocks and boulders move down the river, they break up and become smaller, so that the closer you get to the coast, the more gravel you have and the less boulders you have. Gravel management is a complementary activity to our stop banks. We've built stop banks to protect highly productive land and our urban areas, but what that can mean is that gravel is constrained within that channel created by those stop banks, and it can build up in ways that are detrimental to our stop banks because it can push river flows during high rainfall events straight into our stop banks, which can damage and breach them, therefore defeating the purpose of a stop bank. Gravel can also build up to higher levels, meaning that it occupies space that floodwaters should be occupying, which can also be detrimental to our stop banks as well. There's a lot of things that we do to manage gravel. We start off by determining what the optimal level of gravel is in the river for each part of the river. That level will change depending on how wide the river is, how steep the river is, and therefore our grade line, which is that optimal level, will change depending on those parameters. Ideally, we let the natural course of the river play out in the terms of managing that gravel level, but in places it will accumulate, and in other places we'll have a deficit of gravel. In those situations, we then have to intervene with the natural process. We start off by raking our gravel beaches to break up the weed mats that bind that gravel together, so that when the river's in flood, it'll naturally pick that gravel up and move it along. On occasion, we may have to spray that weed as well, but our preference is the gravel raking. Where that doesn't work, we obviously then have to take a further level of intervention, and we do that by extracting gravel. Most of our gravel extracted by private contractors down to grade line. That process is managed quite closely with conditions of consent to ensure that we're doing that in a sustainable way. How do we measure gravel? Well, we undertake a traditional survey with guys with their survey equipment, the theodolite or the total station, and their staffs. They measure the ground level of the gravel probably about every metre across the river, all the way into the riverbed, so under the water, so that we have a profile of that riverbed in that location that we can then compare to our grade line. That will then tell us whether the river's got too much gravel, the right amount of gravel, or not enough gravel, so that we can then further manage it. Gravel extraction is pretty straightforward. It involves large diggers and big dump trucks. Some of those dump trucks can be 40 to 50 tonnes fully loaded, which makes the operation as efficient as possible. We, in association with Canoa and MP, are funding private contractors to remove gravel. That gravel goes to a number of different uses, predominantly roads, concrete construction work. We also use it to reconstruct stop banks, both in central Hawke's Bay and in Hiratonga Plains, and it can also be used in farm tracks and other things like that. If you're really interested in finding out a bit more about our flood protection schemes or our gravel management practices, head to our website hbrc.govt.nz.